Hey, beautiful people, is Nicole Nash. I want to reintroduce myself once again. I'm a licensed mental health therapist. I specialize in trauma and grief. And if you're catching we're in the middle of 30 days, 30 ways to level up your healing. And we are on day 16, y'all. So I'm very excited because we're pushing along. I wanted to record today's live or today's topic, just so that you all have access to it. We're going to continue to push through. We've been talking about trauma roots, trauma fruits. We've been getting into, especially yesterday, I want to spend time with performance driven worthiness versus identity driven worthiness, discussing, the downside of performance. And the one thing I shared yesterday was in your career, you probably notice success in your career just because it is a performance based environment. You have to perform, right? But sometimes I've noticed, both personally and also professionally with my clients, is that even though there's areas of success, the areas that they were lacking success, which is like their relationships and with their family, and even with like their community and just their friendships and things like that, but also they know a slight impact with their careers, was because there is this concept or this ideal mindset, rather, that we had to perform, when really in those areas we were never called to perform. We were always called just to land on that our worthiness, our identity was worthy, and around the right people in the right situations in order to really obtain peace, especially with God. We never were called to perform. We were just called to just exist and be, right? So that was yesterday. For today, I want to continue because, again, I help women in leadership heal by overcoming emotional wounds that were caused by traumatic roots and traumatic life events. I would say that my personal statement is that I help these women really shift from a performance-based worthiness, meaning the do, into an identity-based worthiness, meaning to actually understand that even in spite of their traumatic background and backstory, they were always worthy, and you still continue to be worthy. Because I find when you shift and you really heal those roots, you know that your identity, your inner child, who you are, is going to heal along, and you'll be able to operate from a different mindset, which will show you different fruits in all areas of your life domains, right? So for today, I really wanted to get into why it's so important that we begin calling out stuff. My thing, if I had to title this, is why it's so detrimental for you to normalize what you always should have pathologized. And again, I deal with complex trauma as well as a generational or transgenerational trauma, because I find that sometimes family tradition gets passed off and gets continued when really it's traumatic and it's traumatizing. Meaning, just because it was okay in one season or one generation doesn't mean that it's something that needs to be continued. And so the other day I went on a live with a very incredible woman who's also about healing trauma, especially in leadership. And one example I gave was back in the day when, especially for African American, our ancestry in this country, our ancestors were more than likely enslaved, right? And so I gave the concept of food and how back in that generation they had to eat things like, we say chitlins, y'all may say chitterlings, but we say chitlins, okay, down south. But they had to eat really unedible things in order to survive. So was that like necessary in that season? Yes. However, though, I always want to challenge, is it within context in this season, in this current generation? And sometimes we pass down family tradition just for the sake of, hey, well, that's what we always do and that's how it's always been done, not understanding that that tradition is actually trauma, that the need to perform, the need to be superwoman in one generation, it may have been necessary because you had no choice, but in the next generation it actually is trauma. And when we neglect to shift with context, when we continue to push on, well, we're family, we're your blood, we all you got, and that causes for you to have to subject yourself to unhealthy relationships, then no, there's something wrong with that. Even though understandably there may have been a time that family was really all you had, right? And I'm just naming out examples. And so I really want to get into why it's dangerous to normalize what you honestly within your family you need to begin calling out, right? And so again, when we are continuing tradition, I want to say there's a difference between normal and healthy. If you look up the definition of normal, it just involves frequency, meaning something that's typical, something that's frequent. And just because something is frequently occurring does not mean it was always healthy. Just because you're used to seeing whoopings, and just because you're used to doing that, children need to be seen and not heard. Just because that's surrounding you and that's all you see does not mean it's actually healthy. So that's one reason why I want you to really be honest about what's working for you and not working for you, even when it comes to certain relationships. Because here's the thing, when we continue to normalize and continue to say that this is okay when it's not, that's how we continue to perpetuate generational trauma, y'all. Meaning, I'll share this again. We are impacted and we are comprised of our genetics and biology. We can't escape that. There's just some things you're going to naturally inherit, your DNA. You are also influenced and shaped by your environmental exposure and upbringing. But the last one I always stress, because this is your key to breaking generational things, is we are also a combination of our personal choice. So it gets to a point where you may not have known better in the past, but the moment you know better, it's now your responsibility to shift and do better. Meaning you can no longer blame what has happened to you when you have personal choice. So if you do see that there's things within your family that is not working, why are you not calling it out? And when I say call it out, it's never to shame, it's never to look down. It's to say, I see something that is not working for me. It's working against me. That's the definition I consider of unhealthiness. And so I'm making the personal choice to shift, pivot, and do something different. Now, I'm going to be honest, when we deal with family, it's one of the hardest dynamics, because you may be considered the black sheep. You may be considered that you're going against family tradition, that you don't care. You may be called, especially one value in my family has always been respect, and you may be considered disrespectful. Did I tell you something? You're grown. And as a grown adult, you may have to look at the very people that you grew up with, who raised you, to consider as far as what is working and what's no longer working. Because it's now your choice if you want to continue to perpetuate any cycles of generational trauma that you know is not right. Okay? The other thing I will say, the reason why it's so important that we need to call out stuff instead of normalizing stuff is, sometimes I always go with the standpoint that you should always treat a person as if they're ignorant, meaning they lack information, versus willfulness, meaning sometimes you're put in your family's life to be that female Moses where you're breaking tradition, meaning sometimes you'll hear, well, this is how we always did it. My parents did it to me, and their parents did it to my parents, and so on and so forth, right? So sometimes that's why I say we have to be gentle, and we have to be compassionate, but at the same time be firm. And whatever that looks like for you, I highly support you enacting on that. But sometimes we have to be a little bit more patient, especially with the people surrounding us, because it may be an ignorance thing, meaning they just do not know any differently, because that is something that they're used to. Right? And so I would say just continue to stand firm on what you know is right, calling it out, y'all. Okay? Calling it out, and stop normalizing it when you know at the end of the day it's unhealthy. It's not working for you. And if you decide to continue it through your personal decision, your personal choice, it could be detrimental to the very generation you have been assigned to steward, to deliver, to bring out of Egypt. Whether that's your own children, whether it's in leadership, whether it's in your community, whether it's mentorship, whatever it is. So I'm going to ask you all to really sit down and have some hard conversations with yourself about the family stuff, about the things in your family that's disguised as a tradition, but honestly, it's something that you need to explore. But I'm about to hop off here, y'all. All right. So until next time, God willing, I will see you tomorrow. Bye.